On today's video, we're going to talk a bit about Buddhism for today, what a Buddhism for today might look like. And at the end, I'll talk also a little bit about the Secular Buddhist Association, coming right up. I'm Doug Smith. I'm study director at the Secular Buddhist Association. That's secularbuddhism.org. If you're new to the channel and interested in living a wiser and a kinder and a calmer life, consider subscribing to the channel. So, Buddhism for today. I think a lot of people tend to talk about that. No matter what kind of Buddhism you're interested in, or what kind of Buddhism attracts you, or what kind you're actually practicing right now, I think all of us tend to feel that the Buddhism that we're practicing is right for today, and so it is. In a sense, every kind of Buddhism that we see around us in the world right now is active and practical for today. I mean, it's providing some service to people who practice it. And in a sense, that's where I'm going to be going with this talk of mine, which may seem a little bit, when I've just brought it up this way, may seem a little bit obvious, but I want to make a little bit of a subtle point here. So everyone has their own preference. Everyone has their own taste. And in matters of taste, it's difficult to convince other people. And there's a sense in which really it's not possible to convince other people. If you like vanilla ice cream and I like chocolate ice cream, we're just wasting our breath if we're trying to convince each other of the merits of our own kind of ice cream. And a lot of, I think, unnecessary argument and dispute is wasted around people trying to convince each other that their own way of practice is the best, whether it be within Buddhism, one school of Buddhism versus another, or in fact whether it be between Buddhism and something else. There was just a recent book out I've seen about why I'm not a Buddhist. And of course there's the book that I did a talk about here on the channel about why Buddhism is true. There are aspects of all of these that are fine, and every one of us has our opinion and has the right to our opinion and has the right to express our opinion if we like. But we have to be concerned with the possibility of argument and dispute causing anger, causing hatred, causing enmity between us in matters that at the end of the day are not going to be resolvable. Because if you like a particular thing and I don't, or the reverse, there's really relatively little that we can do to convince one another of that. So where am I going with this? Well, many of us nowadays feel the need to practice Buddhism. We're interested in the practice of Buddhism. We're interested in the wisdom that Buddhism brings to us. But there are aspects of traditional belief and practice, in particular traditional belief really, that interest us less. In particular, there is the belief in rebirth. There are the beliefs in active karma, where karma, the ethical goodness or badness of things that we do in this life, redound to our next life. We may agree that things that we do during our life will redound to the world after we pass on. That's reasonable, I think, for all of us to understand. But the idea that karmic actions in this life may redound to a next life that is our life, that may be more difficult for some of us to believe or to accept. And indeed, the Buddha himself, in his famous discourse to the Kalamas, indeed discussed with people who seem to have had doubts about rebirth and said, look, even if rebirth isn't true, nevertheless, you should still behave ethically because it's good for you to behave ethically within your own lifetime. And we may accept that, but we may have difficulty with some of these more traditional, shall we say, more speculative kinds of opinions about the future, or about particular supernatural or magical abilities that the Buddha and other awakened people were supposed to have, given their awakened state in the early texts. In the early texts, it's said that the Buddha and other awakened beings had certain kinds of abilities which we don't necessarily see in the world today. And so the question is, are we to accept those at face value? Or are we to accept them on faith, just that is to say on blind faith? Or are we just to let's say, leave them to one side as possibilities maybe, but as something that we may not ourselves necessarily accept? Because after all, the aim of Buddhism is to give up our identification with things in the world, to give up our notion of self-identity, of a permanent self that continues, to give up our notion of a permanent world of anything in the world around us that we can cling on to and thereby gain some kind of permanent refuge. These are the kinds of ideas that at the end of the day are what's so important in early Buddhism, in Buddhism in general. So many of us we want a route to practice Buddhism without necessarily accepting some of these more speculative kind of ideas. And indeed, if you go to any contemporary Dharma center in the West, or in, let's say, in America, in Europe, even in Asia, I'm sure nowadays, you'll find a certain segment of the population who is more, shall we say, skeptical about these ideas, or maybe doesn't believe them at all, or maybe is just agnostic about them, doesn't have any particular opinion about them, really goes to the center for a daily or regular kind of practice, and let the future take care of itself, let's say. And if they're reborn into a future life, well, they are, and if they're not, when they're not. But the practice itself, nevertheless, is the same. And indeed, a recent book that I did a talk about a while back was a kind of an anthropological study of in particular, Theravada practice in the West, in the United States. And this author, she looked at several different Theravada centers. One was a traditional Thai, I believe it was, Theravada center, and another one was a contemporary Vipassana or Insight Center in Cambridge, Massachusetts, I believe. And when she asked the people in Cambridge, Massachusetts, the people who practiced there, about their beliefs in rebirth and those kinds of things, whether they accepted them and looked to the practice to sort of reinforce those ideas, she found very little uptake on that. In other words, most of the people who practiced that center really were not interested in those kinds of issues, and many of them indeed may not have believed in rebirth at all. And I think this is pretty general. So if you go to a contemporary Dharma center, you'll find a large segment of the population that is really relatively agnostic about these matters, that is there, again, for a kind of a regular daily practice, and not there so much for discussions of more speculative kinds of supernatural ideas or ideas of what happens after they die. And the question, therefore, is, in today's kind of Buddhism, is there room, is there a space for people with differing kinds of backgrounds, differing kinds of approaches, differing kinds of beliefs to practice together in the same Sangha, in the same center? It's the view of a secular Buddhist approach that there is room for this. Not only that there's going to be people who don't necessarily accept or aren't interested in issues of rebirth, but that these people should be able to accepted within a contemporary Dharma center, that there's room to practice together, whether or not we believe certain things, that we can practice side by side, because the practice at the end of the day is the same, or the same to a 99.9% degree of similarity. There will be certain things that some of us in our practice aren't particularly interested in. Some of us aren't particularly interested, let's say, in devotional practices or in ritualized practices. But many contemporary Dharma centers in, let's say, in particular the Theravada tradition, that is to say, insight centers, Vipassana centers, tend to be relatively low on issues of devotion, on issues of particular kinds of ritual practices, and so you won't find those as much. For this particular reason, I think, this is part of the reason why you won't find them. I did an earlier talk on a sort of a secular approach to rituals, which I can put a link up to here if you're interested in seeing that video. So the aim of secular Buddhism, at least in my view, today, for Buddhism for today, isn't to convince anybody of anything. I don't think that it's possible really to convince people very easily of anything. Certainly on this kind of issue of supernatural claims about rebirth, you're going to find I think within the sciences you're going to find a lot of skepticism towards this. But on the other hand, if you are willing to look for particular scientists who agree with you, you can always find one or two who do. So there's going to be a pushback either way. So the point is, from a secular approach, the point is not to convince anybody of anything. The point is to open up a common space, or at least to make clear the openness of this common space within many kinds of contemporary Dharma centers, in particular the ones I'm familiar with being insight centers, Vipassana centers. Openness to practice no matter what your particular belief is. Indeed, many contemporary Dharma centers host people practicing there from different religions, frankly. I mean, you'll have Christians, you'll have Jews, you may even have Muslims practicing together the same practice in the same Dharma center, coming from very different backgrounds. And this kind of approach, I think, is central to the broader secular Buddhist enterprise, or the broader secular Buddhist way of approaching Buddhism. In the same way that within politics nowadays, we have a sort of notion of secular politics, where we have our own religious or non-religious beliefs that we take to the world, but when it comes to a common space of political enterprise, we try not to let one of these dominate over the other. Now, I think we all know that in the practice of this, it tends that one of these religions, the most big and the biggest in the United States, tends to dominate. But at least in theory, we're supposed to allow all of them their space without allowing one to dominate the rest. And similarly, we want an open space in our Dharma centers, I think, for people to practice side by side. And it's fine that some people are traditional believers, but it's also fine that some people are not. We can all practice the same meditation practices, the same mindfulness practices, the same practices of ethics, the same practices of concentration meditation, the same metta or loving kindness practices, no matter what our beliefs that we take to the practice happen to be. Now, when it comes to secular Buddhism in particular, probably the leading one in the world, certainly one of the leading ones, is the Secular Buddhist Association, of which I'm a part. And it's been in existence for many years. It is, in fact, a completely and entirely volunteer organization. It's run on a shoestring budget. There's only a few of us, and we're not paid by them. The small amount of money that they have been able to raise goes exclusively really to keeping the website up and that kind of thing, and doing a small amount of marketing over on Facebook. But that's the extent of it. And if you've been to the SBA website recently in the last few months, and here I'm talking in April of 2019, if you've been to the website in the last few months, you'll notice that it's been looking kind of sickly. And the reason for that is that the website was pretty badly hacked several times, at least we believe several times, in the last few months. And as a result, it was really down for quite a while because, again, none of us are paid. It takes a long time and effort, and indeed a certain amount of money, I believe, to fix these things. And as a result, our great tech person, Dana Nuri, has worked on this along with Ted Meisner. Ted does our wonderful podcasts on the SBA, the leading, I would say, Buddhist, and certainly the leading secular Buddhist podcasts in the world. And he and Dana have been working on the website in the time that they have outside of their normal work to try to get it back up and running. But part of the issue has been that while the website has been sickly, as I say, we run on donations. The donations have kind of dried up, which is understandable because there hasn't been much there. There hasn't been much new there. We haven't been able to publish things to the website because it's been basically broken. So here's to a small plea to, if you're interested in the general approach of secular Buddhism and trying to expand the reach of secular Buddhism within the Buddhist community and within the world at large, consider giving a donation. I'll put a link to the donation website down below. You can either donate once or donate regularly, monthly, whatever it happens to be. This is entirely separate from my own Patreon issue, my own Patreon webpage. This is just for the Secular Buddhist Association, and again, I'll link it down below. And for U.S. residents, taxpayers. The SBA is, in fact, a not-for-profit, so anything you donate there is tax deductible. And I should say that along with Ted's wonderful, really formative and so important podcasts, we also have a regular practice circle run by Mark Nickelbein, which is also wonderful and has been growing and getting a lot of notice around the web, which I think is wonderful. He also does, I believe, some guided meditations over on Insight Timer. And Jennifer Hawkins also does our outreach. She does our community, helps foster our notion of our community around the web, around Facebook and other places, and does outreach to other organizations of Buddhists, in particular some underserved kinds of communities, which I think is incredibly important going forward. So we have, even though we're a very small umbrella and again run on an absolute shoestring budget, we have a number of things going on. So I hope you will take a look at the website now that hopefully, fingers crossed, it is still up and running. And again, donate if you have the wish and the will. So if you've enjoyed this podcast, share it, give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and I hope we'll catch you on the next one of these videos. And meanwhile, be well.